I have been convicted this week. I have been convicted by some of the reading that I've been doing. I'm reading a book entitled Dangerous Calling. And the point of the book is that those of us who have been called into ministry are on dangerous ground. It's easy for us to forget who the king is and who the ambassador is. Sometimes we get those roles reversed because we think we're the king. Pride is an insidious foe. And I've been convicted about it this week. You might think, well, Pastor, I'm not sure that that's necessarily your besetting sin. And if you don't see it, praise the Lord. But as I've been reading this book, I've been seeing it. And I've been challenged to... This was my last council meeting with Baptist church planners, at least for the near future. And in some ways that will be, I'm sad about that, because I've been challenged to be around those men. Every time I come back from that, I think to myself, what a great week. Some godly people who deeply and desperately love the Lord. I've been challenged by that. It's a good time. I've also been challenged with respect to my preaching. And this message was completed before the challenge was issued, so I'm going to see if I can figure out how to deliver it the way that the challenge came to me. But Joshua chapter 1. I want to read verses 10 through 18. And then we're going to come back and take a look at this from the perspective of foundational leadership. Joshua chapter 1, beginning with verse 10. Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, pass through the camp and command the people, saying, prepare provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you will cross over this Jordan to go in to possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess. And to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua spoke, saying, remember the word which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, the Lord your God is giving you rest, and is giving you this land. Your wives, your little ones, and your livestock shall remain in the land which Moses gave you on this side of the Jordan, but you shall pass before your brethren, armed, all your mighty men of valor, and help them, until the Lord has given your brethren rest, as he gave you. And they also have taken possession of the land which the Lord your God is giving them. Then you shall return to the land of your possession and enjoy it, which Moses, the Lord's servant, gave you on this side of the Jordan toward the sunrise. So they answered Joshua, saying, all that you command us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Just as we heeded Moses in all things, so we will heed you. Only the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your command and does not heed your words and all that you command him shall be put to death. Only be strong and of good courage. Actually, 3 Sundays ago, we dealt with the first 9 verses of Joshua. Then we focused on verse 8 the next Sunday, and then David spoke with you last week. But when we talked about those first 9 verses, we referred to them as a commissioning service. It was Joshua's commissioning service. A commissioning service is really an exceptional time. It's a wonderful time. The newly placed leader is flush with anticipation. And those he will lead are anxious to see what kind of a leader he will be, hoping and believing that the choice that they made was a good one. I've been around, had the privilege to be around, a number of commissioning services. And let me say that the service is a lot of fun and it's exciting, but what follows is more important than the service itself. It's kind of like a wedding ceremony. Kids come to me and say, we want you to do our wedding. And I say to them, I don't do weddings. What do you mean you don't do weddings? I don't do weddings. I do marriages. Amen. Marriages are much more important than weddings. Now, the wedding is an important kickoff to the marriage, but that's what it is, a kickoff to the marriage. And a commissioning ceremony is a kickoff to a ministry. It's not the ministry itself, it's the kickoff to the ministry. So what follows is the proof, or the lack of it, that the choice was warranted and the person being commissioned is the right person for the job. I remember a commissioning service where the church family gave the new pastor and his family, actually showered the new pastor and his family with gifts and made them feel as welcome as it was possible to make them. In this service, there were several speakers who assured the church that they had made a wise choice and that this man was going to be a wonderful pastor for their church. The expectations and the anticipation and the excitement were high. And what followed was unmitigated disaster. The man lasted about a year in that church, tore up a lot of families during that year, left and is now out of the ministry. And the church still, to this day, reels from the impact of that poor choice. Well, we're going to see the opposite this morning. We're going to see Joshua's first dynamic steps of leadership. Steps that demonstrated that he had a solid grasp of history, that he understood what he was supposed to do and was willing to obey, that he could delegate, that he could command respect. They also demonstrate that he understood the source of his authority, and it was not him. The commissioning was over. It was time to take charge. And so in verses 10 and 11, you have the command to get ready. And I want you to notice the basis of Joshua's leadership. In verse 10, Joshua takes the reins of leadership firmly in hand, and it reads, "Then Joshua commanded." That phrase is important because it indicates the basis of Joshua's leadership, which shows up in verses 1 through 9. Nothing in the text indicates that Joshua aspired to be the next Moses. Nothing in the text indicates that the people of Israel drafted him to take Moses' place. Nothing in the text leads us to believe that Joshua's rise to leadership was of human origin at all. As a matter of fact, I want you to keep your fingers here and go back to Numbers chapter 27. Look at verse 12. Now the Lord said to Moses, "Go up into this Mount Abiram and see the land which I have given to the children of Israel. And when you have seen it, you also shall be gathered to your people, as Aaron your brother was gathered. For in the wilderness of Zin, during the strife of the congregation, you rebelled against my command to hallow me at the waters before their eyes. These are the waters of Meribah at Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin." Then Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, "Let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, set a man over the congregation, who may go out before them and go in before them, who may lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be like sheep which have no shepherd." And the Lord said to Moses, "Take Joshua the son of Nun with you, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Set him before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation, and inaugurate him in their sight. And you shall give some of your authority to him, that all the congregation of the children of Israel may be obedient. He shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire before the Lord for him by the judgment of the Urim. At his word they shall go out, at his word they shall come in, he and all the children of Israel with him, all the congregation." So Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua and set him before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation, and he laid his hands on him and inaugurated him just as the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses. Joshua was the leader of Israel because God told Moses this man is going to succeed you. Moses, you're going to die. You're not going into the land. You're not going to lead the children of Israel in these battles that are coming. You're going to die on this side of the Jordan River because of the sin that you committed back in the wilderness. And Moses at first God didn't say anything about Joshua. He just said, you're going to die. And Moses said, we need somebody to lead the people. If it's not going to be me, then you need to choose somebody to lead the people. Well, God already had that in mind. He just let Moses say it. You need to choose somebody. Joshua's the guy. Joshua's the man. I want you to choose Joshua. I want you to set him up in front of the congregation. I want everybody in the congregation to recognize that this is the man. I want Eliezer to inaugurate him, to set him up as the new leader, so that they will realize this is the person that God has chosen to be the leader of his people. That exchange was confirmed in the first 9 verses of Joshua chapter 1. Joshua was God's man. To disobey Joshua was to disobey God. On the basis of God's choice and his commissioning of Joshua, in these verses at the beginning of the book of Joshua, Joshua took the reins of leadership. And that's why it reads, then Joshua commanded. Then, on the basis of that commissioning service. Then, on the basis of the fact that God had chosen him. Then, on the basis of the fact that Moses' time was done and it was now Joshua's time to lead. Then, Joshua commanded. Not until then, but then. Then I want you to notice the second thing about his leadership, and it's one that we hear about with leadership all the time. Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people. The first thing he did as a leader was delegate responsibility. Now, delegation sometimes gets a bad rap. People sometimes say, he's delegating responsibility because he doesn't want to do the work himself. Some of you in the military have, particularly those of you who have been in the enlisted ranks, have had opportunity to take a look at your officers and say, that jerk doesn't want to do the work himself, so he makes me do it. Delegation is a part of leadership. And the first thing Joshua did was delegate. Unfortunately, some leaders are afflicted with the same problem, that they don't want to delegate because they feel like if I do that, then somehow I'm shirking my responsibility. I should be willing to do the work. Well, you should be willing to do the work that you have to do. And part of that is to find people to help you in the job. That's right. No leader will last. And no ministry will flourish if the work is all done by the leader or by the leaders. Together we accomplish more. Not while we sit here, the pastor accomplishes more. Or the pastors. Can I chide you just a little bit? When we were getting ready to bring on an assistant pastor, some people were saying, oh, good, he can do X. Whatever X happened to be. Folks, the role of the pastoral staff is to help you learn to do the ministry. Amen. It is not to do all the ministry on our own. And Joshua understood that concept clearly all the way back here in the 6th book of the Bible. Then Joshua commanded the captains of the people. I have a job for you guys to do with all the people. Delegation is important. And Joshua demonstrated an understanding in that crucial area of leadership responsibility. The third thing I want you to notice in these first 2 verses is the direction of Joshua's leadership. He said, pass through the camp and command the people, saying, prepare provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you will cross over this Jordan to go in to possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess. Joshua demonstrated understanding that clear directions were necessary. And he gave clear directions that were directly from God. Back in verse 2, God gave Joshua clear directions as to what his role would be. That role would be to lead the people into the promised land so that they could possess it. There would be fighting with the present inhabitants. There would be administrative headaches in trying to figure out who gets what land. But Joshua understood clearly his role. And he also clearly communicated that to his delegated leaders so that they could clearly communicate the word to the people. The people of Israel knew where Joshua was going. We're not going east. We're not going north. We're not going south. We're going west across this river. And when we cross the river, we're going to inhabit that land. That's where we're going. Joshua knew it. He clearly communicated it. They knew what he was trying to accomplish. The result was that they obeyed. They rallied to him because they understood the direction and were united in moving that way, west across the Jordan River. Sometimes those of us in leadership have an idea of what we want to do, and we don't communicate it very clearly to the people in our charge. I have been guilty of that from time to time. And some of you have said to me, Pastor, we just need clear direction. Let me first of all say, forgive me. I don't want to be unclear, but sometimes I have a clear idea in my mind and I don't say it very clearly out of my mouth. But this is an aspect of leadership that's important. Now, let me say that there's a second part to that. When it is given clearly, there should be a united movement in that direction. When that direction comes from God and it is clearly communicated, as a church family, we should be moving in that direction. Direction is critical. Without direction, we're adrift and very little gets done. Now in verse 12, Joshua changes his direction of focus. Verses 10 and 11, he's talking to a small group of people who are going to address the whole congregation. And they do. They send that message out to the whole congregation. Then Joshua draws a few people to himself and says, I have a challenge for this specific group. It's a second aspect of Joshua's initial foundational leadership. He challenged a certain group of people to help. Let me reset the stage for you. After the fighting on the east side of the Jordan River, and there was some fighting over on that side, verse 15 calls it the side of the Jordan toward the sunrise, the east side. The people of the tribes of Reuben and Gad, plus the half tribe, or half of the people from the tribe of Manasseh, requested of Moses that that land, the land of Gilead, the land of Jazer, become their possession. And you find that whole story in Numbers 32. We're not going to go back and read it right now, but that's where it is. So Moses agrees to that request on one condition. And that one condition is that when it came time to cross the river and take the fight to the people on the west side of the Jordan River, that the warriors among the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh would cross with their brothers and help them fight. Now, that was only fair because the rest of Israel had helped them earn their land on the east side of the Jordan River. So they would come with them to the west side. Now, here's the difficulty. What were they going to do with their wives and their children? Well, they were going to leave them behind in the cities on the east side. Wouldn't they be prey for anybody who came along? Well, under normal circumstances, yes. So there was a trust factor that had to be there for the Gadites and the Reubenites and that half-tribe of Manasseh to say, we're going to leave our families, our unprotected little ones, on this side of the river. They can go in the cities, and that's true, and they can shut themselves in and so forth and so on, but we're going to be at war for a while. And they were. It was months. before they could go back to their families. So it's not just a real easy thing to do. Sometimes you look at that stuff and say, oh, no sweat. It's only fair, right? So they fought for us, we go fight for them, it's only fair. Well, when everybody was fighting on the east side, all the families were together. But then when they had to leave their families behind. So there was a trust factor involved here. But I do want you to notice that when Joshua came to them, he challenged them to do what they had already been commanded to do. And again, I have 3 thoughts under this challenge to help. There was a direction to Joshua's challenge. It was a specific group, and we've talked about that it was the Reubenites and the 2.5 tribes, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half of the people from the tribe of Manasseh. And in case any of them had forgotten what Moses had said, or in case their initial resolve was wavering because now they're thinking about their families or whatever, or in case they really didn't mean it when they agreed to Moses' condition, Joshua pulled them aside to reissue God's command. That face-to-face specificity, to draw that group aside, away from everybody else, to draw them aside and specifically say to them, this is what needs to be done, was an important aspect of leadership. Joshua wanted to be sure there would be no misunderstandings. And he risked a confrontation. There could have been a confrontation here. Moses is gone. Yeah, we made a promise to Moses, but you're not Moses. And we're not keeping that promise. It's the time for us to be planting over here, and we need to be taking care of that, or whatever would have been their excuse. He risked a confrontation to be sure that the message was clear. The second thing I want you to notice here is a reminder in Joshua's challenge. The first word in verse 13 is remember. Joshua was issuing a challenge to these tribes that had to do with coming battles, but it was based on past commands from God and from Moses. Remember the word which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you. Joshua had a keen sense of the history of the situation. His command for the future work of these 2.5 tribes was solidly based on recent historical grounds. This wasn't a new command. It was a reminder of a command that had already been issued. A good leader is going to remember. He's going to have a sense of the history behind his responsibilities. A good leader will remind those he leads of the history behind their responsibilities. Because we are prone to wander. We are prone to forget. In our country today, one of the things that's interesting is how much people just sort of forget about our history and the things that are happening in their lives and in the life of our country in general today. They want to focus on today. They want to think about what the past held. The past is gone, and we don't care about that. You know, the past is the past, but the past is also the foundation for where we are today. We are prone to forget. Sometimes it's easy just to let sleeping dogs lie, not to dredge up the past, but just to move on, forget about it. But when it comes to an historic basis for our actions, we do well to remind those in our charge of the history that is behind us. This church is now 53 years old. Celebrated it's hard to believe it's more than 3 years ago now that we had our 50th anniversary celebration. We serve the Lord here at Rustic Hills Baptist Church as we do because we stand on the shoulders of a half dozen or so pastors who have served and led this congregation in the past. We stand on their shoulders. We didn't do this on our own. There's not a person here who was here when this church was founded, not one. Couldn't say that when I first got here because there were a few, but not any longer. We all stand on someone else's shoulders. We serve as we do because a man named Carl Wirtz gave half of his life to establish this church and to set it on a solid biblical course and to help it thrive. We serve as we do because we have made promises to God over the years that we would stay true to the Word of God and stay true to our Baptist heritage. That's why we serve the way we do. There's a history to this place, and we need to be reminded, just as the children of Israel needed to be reminded. The third thing in Joshua's challenge is the authority of that challenge. In verses 13, 14, and 15, primarily verse 13 and 15, Joshua referred to Jehovah 5 times. Twice he reminded them that when Moses spoke to them about this issue, he did so as the Lord's servant. Moses wasn't the one saying this. Yes, he was, but Moses was the one saying this because God had said it to Moses. So God said to Moses, this is what's going to happen, and Moses referred that to the people. 3 times he spoke of the Lord's blessings on the people, and in all 5 comments, there's an implicit reminder that this wasn't coming from Joshua. Not even from Moses. Coming from God. So once again, the authority for Joshua's remarks came from God, not from Joshua. He was acting on God's behalf as he gave direction to the people. Finally, I want you to notice in verses 16, 17, and 18, the confidence of the 2.5 tribes as it's recorded in those verses. Their response was a response of confidence. All that you command us, verse 16, we will do. And wherever you send us, we will go. Joshua, we are servants of the Most High God, and we are followers of His leader, and that's you. You point the way, and we'll go. In fact, you lead the way. Don't just point it. You lead the way, and we'll go. We're with you. If Joshua had been timid or had not understood what God had in mind or had communicated some sort of a mixed message, I suspect the response would have been a little different. But the people responded to a confident leader with confidence. They responded to a leader who knew where he was going by following. They responded to a leader who obeyed God by obeying God themselves. And let me say, we're going to talk about it here in just a second as we wrap up. But let me say that there is a responsibility on both sides of that equation. There was the responsibility to be confident in what he was doing, to communicate it well, and to obey God on the part of the leader. And there was a responsibility on the part of those who were following that leader to respond with confidence, to follow that direction, and to obey God themselves. There's a give and take in this that's important. There's something else I want you to see here, and it kind of reminds me of the Bereans in the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, the Berean Christians, or the Berean Jews actually, are listening to Paul, and they're searching the scriptures to see whether what Paul is saying is so. They're not taking it at face value. They're searching the scriptures. And when they're searching the scriptures, they're finding out that what Paul is teaching them is true. That statement about the Bereans is a very positive statement in the book of Acts. Very complimentary statement. And here, in verse 17, it says, just as we heeded Moses in all things, so we will heed you. Only the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Now that sounds like a statement that says, we hope God's going to be alongside of you. In a sense, it's really a statement that says, as long as you're following God, we'll follow you. We followed Moses as long as he followed God. We'll follow you as long as you follow God. There is a connection between Joshua's obedience and their willingness to follow him. Their condition was a challenge to the leader. We'll follow you as long as you follow God. Now let me say, no Christian leader, no matter how charismatic, no matter how dynamic, no matter how good he is at delegating or providing direction, is worthy of your commitment and submission if he is obviously not following God. And there are leaders, Christian leaders out there all over the place today who are obviously not following God. The message that they preach, the methods that they employ are ungodly and worldly. And you have a responsibility as believers who are able to get into the Word of God yourselves to discern the difference between somebody who is following God and someone who is not. And these believers, these followers of Jehovah, who are also followers of Joshua, said to him, we're following you because you're following God, and as long as you continue to follow God, we'll follow you. It was an important challenge to Joshua. He's been the one issuing the challenge, and they're issuing a challenge back here in verse 17. And then finally, there is an encouragement in that confidence. And in verse 18, whoever rebels against your command, does not heed your words, and all that you command him shall be put to death. Whoa. Capital punishment for not following the leader. I mean, I played follow the leader as a kid. There was never capital punishment involved. But in this case, the idea was that person is leading us astray from the living God, and we're not going there. And we're not going to allow that person to take us there. We will follow you. As long as you're following God, we'll follow you, and we won't allow anybody else to pull us away from that. Only, you hear what it says? See what it says at the end of verse 18? Be strong and of good courage. Boy, does that take you back to verses 1 through 9. God said that to Joshua several times. Be strong, be courageous. Be strong, be courageous. Be strong and courageous in the fight. Be strong and courageous in the spiritual leadership responsibilities you have. Be strong and be of good courage. And isn't it interesting that God's people said the same thing to Joshua here? Be strong, be courageous. Be the man God wants you to be. One of the things, and one of the reasons that I prayed the way I did this morning, one of the things that has come up in this reading is that as a family, we have a responsibility for each other. The pastoral staff has a responsibility to minister to your needs, to reach out when you're hurting, to be a part of your life when there's things that you need us to be a part of. That's not to say that we're going to always be at your doorstep every day, but it is to say that when there's something that's going on in your life, we need to be a part of that. And that is actually reciprocal. Do you realize that the pastors in this church are sin-cursed people who still need to be sanctified by the grace of God, who still struggle with the problems that we have in our lives because we have not become like Christ completely yet? And we need you to love on us and tell us from time to time, Pastor, I care about you and I see something that needs to change. I hope you don't do that from the perspective of wanting to, get the upper hand somehow. And I hope you're not starting a list. But we are family. And I see give and take in this passage. I see the leaders saying, don't forget. And I see the followers saying, don't you forget either. You are a leader of God's people because God has given that responsibility as long as you follow him. So for those of us who are leaders, we need to follow the Lord and involve God's people. A couple of months we're going to do our appreciation dinner. One of the benefits that I think of that appreciation dinner is for all of us, especially those of us who are in positions of leadership in the church, to recognize how much our church family does. You guys are involved in so many different directions. And sometimes when we've got a need in a particular direction, we can kind of forget that you're involved in a lot of other things. So it's important for us to see that. We need to provide good, clear, specific direction and remind God's people of the reasons we do what we do. Those leadership traits are highlighted in this passage, and we do well to heed them. For those of us who are here this morning who are following God's leader, we need to respect the authority that God has given to this man. Let me say, we are in a congregational church. The authority that I have as the pastor, or that we have as pastoral staff, is not an authority to dictate. This is not a dictatorial church. God help us if we ever get there. It's not where we should be. It's clear when Peter wrote, do not lord it over God's people. We are servants. Leaders, yes, but servant leaders. But those who are part of this church family need to respect the authority that God has given to those of us who are in pastoral leadership. And we need to allow ourselves to be reminded of where we have come from so that we will know where we are going. And once we understand who God's man is, we need to follow with confidence and keep the divine connection uppermost as you encourage the leader to continue to be the man God wants him to be. Serving the Lord is a mutual ministry. It's a mutual ministry between those who lead and those who are led. We are a team. Just as the nation of Israel was a team. We have varying responsibilities, but we have a mandate to be on the same page with God and with each other. Let's bow for prayer.